If British troops were to help maintain a peace deal in Ukraine, what would that involve?
British troops on the ground in Ukraine.
So the PM in the Telegraph saying that Britain will put boots on the ground in Ukraine if he judges that it's necessary. So what message is he sending or trying to send, and who's he trying to send it to?
The world is indeed turning into a boiling cauldron in recent days. European Union leaders are at a crossroads in the Ukraine war and trying to unite on a common peace policy while ensuring Europe's security. In the midst of a situation of high geopolitical tensions, the great powers of the European Union are meeting to discuss how to respond to the Russian threat, and the latest United States moves to end the war. The recent Paris summit, organised by French President Emmanuel Macron, was about how European countries can help Ukraine together. Issues such as whether to deploy European troops and strengthen the overall security of the continent dominated the summit. The importance of this meeting is not only that it is a high-level meeting, but also that it is taking place at a critical moment in the history of the European Union. Despite the organisers' attempts to trivialise the meeting, the reality is that it is taking place at a moment of great international tension. Ever since United States President Donald Trump opened talks with Russia and removed Europe from the negotiating table, European leaders need to decide their role in the peace process and make their voices heard. The Paris summit, which brought together the most senior representatives of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, the Netherlands, Denmark and the United Kingdom, as well as the European Commission and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, addressed several key issues. The most controversial was the possibility of sending European troops to Ukraine as part of a coalition of the willing to provide post-conflict security. It was at this point that the United Kingdom made an incredible breakthrough, saying that it could send up to 10,000 troops to Ukraine. The London government's stunning announcement shocked the United States and Russia. So how will Russia respond to the United Kingdom's statements? Does the United States support the United Kingdom? Can other members send troops to Ukraine after the United Kingdom? You will find the answers to all these curious questions in our video. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to be informed about our content before you start. United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced that he is ready and willing to deploy British troops to Ukraine to enforce any peace deal. Starmer said that any role undertaken in helping to guarantee the security of Ukraine helps to guarantee the security of our continent and that country.
And I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement.
This was the first time Mr. Starmer has openly said he is willing to send British troops to Ukraine. When French President Emmanuel Macron first raised the possibility of sending Western peacekeepers to Ukraine last year, the idea was rejected by other NATO members. But it has gained momentum in recent months, especially before Mr. Trump's inauguration. Mr. Starmer is also calling on other leaders to increase military spending and take a bigger role in NATO. He added that Ukraine's path to joining NATO was irreversible, signalling a divergence with the Trump administration, which has not supported Ukraine joining the Mutual Defense Alliance. Countries such as Germany, Poland and Spain have been less outspoken, preferring to focus on other forms of logistical support. Germany said it was premature to discuss sending troops to war-torn Ukraine as part of a possible peacekeeping force. Christian Hoffmann, deputy German government spokesperson, said that we have repeatedly stated that first of all we have to wait and see how and in what form peace will emerge for Ukraine. Then we will be able to talk about the conditions and how it can be implemented. Sweden said it would not rule out sending troops to Ukraine if necessary. Poland said it had no plans to send troops to Ukraine to ensure security, but would instead provide financial and military assistance to the war-torn country. Defence and security was one of the most important topics discussed. The session discussed the urgent need to strengthen Europe's defence capabilities, as the continent is currently not in a position to respond to the Russian threat. According to Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, Europe needs to act urgently to strengthen its military capabilities, because Europe will not be able to help Ukraine much without a strong defence at home. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also stressed the need to increase defence spending, noting that there are still countries that are below the 2% of GDP threshold in this area. In addition to discussions on military intervention, the meeting also included a debate on the future of Europe's collective defence. France, which has its own separate nuclear capability, expressed hope for more cooperation on nuclear deterrence, but this was a less important topic in the talks. Despite disagreements over troop deployments, Europeans seem to agree on the need to increase military spending and defence cooperation to ensure the continent's long-term security. As the statements show, European Union leaders cannot agree on sending troops to Ukraine. The United Kingdom, however, is adamant. But is the United Kingdom military ready to provide military support to Ukraine? After Starmer's statements, different narratives are emerging. Reports suggest that these will be peacekeeping forces, but the reality is that true peacekeeping forces must be neutral. British troops deployed to support Ukraine can certainly be seen as biased, and the deployment of British forces in Ukraine would fit the Russian narrative of NATO as the aggressor. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but the goal of membership of this alliance is enshrined in its constitution. British forces engaged in any conflict in Ukraine would not enforce Article 5, which states that each member shall regard an attack on another member as an attack on itself and shall assist in its defence. Moreover, United States Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has said that European troops deployed to Ukraine should not be covered by Article 5. The weakness in Starmer's idea is that the United Kingdom does not have the ability to provide enough troops, material, and weapons to act as a real deterrent. This is not so different from the situation of British forces facing war in Europe more than 1 century ago. In 1914, the then Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener, speaking of the Cabinet's decision to go to war in Europe, said, "When they plunged headlong into such a war, did they remember that they had no army and no preparation to equip one? Small numbers would have been nothing more than a speed bump against a massive attack, as the British Expeditionary Force had been in 1914 and 1940. Poor preparation, small numbers and limited equipment meant that their deployment was more an indication of the United Kingdom's support than its real ability to fight a long war against a peer enemy. Britain is in this position again. Years of spending cuts have long eroded the ability of British forces to wage war against a peer enemy. Troop numbers have fallen from 100,000 full-time trained personnel in 2000 to around 70,000 today. Britain also lacks the capacity to produce at the levels required for modern warfare. Much will be needed for immediate capital investment, such as production capacity for weapons and ammunition. Weapons production will require longer-term investment, and supporting infrastructure, such as airfields and storage facilities, abandoned after the end of the Cold War, will need to be rebuilt, both in Britain and across Europe. There is no solution to the immediate problem other than to increase money for defence. But the United Kingdom and many other NATO members have been reluctant to increase defence spending, even though existing capacities are too diminished for European countries to field a capable force. United States President Donald Trump has called for NATO countries to increase defence spending from the current NATO target of 2% to 5% of GDP. This would be very difficult to achieve in the United Kingdom's current fiscal situation without spending cuts elsewhere. While defence ministers are reportedly pushing for an increase of up to 2.65% of GDP, Starmer said he would resist pressure to increase spending above 2.5%. The last time the United Kingdom spent more than 5% of its GDP on defence was at the height of the Cold War. The current international situation began to shift towards two separate blocks, similar to the East-West divide between 1945 and 1991. But the bipolar balance of the Cold War was replaced by increasing instability, as Russia's aggression in Georgia and Ukraine demonstrated. Replacing lost capacity is almost always more expensive than maintaining it. If the governments of past decades had maintained the capabilities of the armed forces, the overall cost would likely have been lower than the amount the country would need to invest now to achieve the same level of defence. Every defence review since 1957 has led to cuts in the defence budget in real terms. The cuts in the military budget continue because nothing before posed a sufficient sub-nuclear threat to the nation that was deemed important enough to reverse them. These cuts are now so deep that the nation is unable to defend itself. The Prime Minister said that we have to show that we are really serious about our own defence and carrying our own burden. This claim is quickly being refuted by signs that he will not increase spending in the near future. None of NATO's Western members has shown any willingness to significantly increase defence spending. Britain expects to spend £56.4 billion in 2024 to 2025, equivalent to about 2.3% of GDP. However, this includes £0.65 billion for pensions and benefits and £0.22 billion for independent organisations that contribute practically nothing to the defence establishment. Since 2014, Britain and NATO have received a clear warning to address shortcomings in their defences. All have chosen to ignore the evolving threat from Russia. The impression is that we not only hope for the best, but plan for the best. Time is the most important factor in the beginning of a war, wrote Lord Tedder, an Air Force commander after the Second World War. 3 years into the war in Ukraine, it is clear that NATO missed an opportunity to strengthen its defences early on. It now faces a significant increase in defence spending just to make up the shortfall of previous decades. So what can the United Kingdom do under the circumstances? For the United Kingdom to take a credible leadership position, it needs to commit to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence in the next fiscal year and increase it thereafter. The United Kingdom's forthcoming Strategic Defence Review, chaired by Lord Robertson, was expected to provide an urgent justification for higher defence spending. The review was meant to reiterate the Lord's finding in a report published in the fall of 2024 that the United Kingdom only has enough ammunition for 2.5 days of intense conflict. Recruitment, investment and procurement, including from the United States, must be translated into a coherent plan. How to finance this increased spending is a problem the United Kingdom shares with other European countries. For many, this will mean more borrowing. Countries that have benefited for years from the peace dividend, drawing money from defence budgets for healthcare, welfare and pensions, might consider leaning in the opposite direction. But this is a formidable political challenge that will take years or even decades to materialise. In the short term, many will consider borrowing more. The United Kingdom government, operating under tight fiscal rules, is in a good position to help steer a debate about ways to do this without raising interest rates. Essentially, this means convincing capital markets that the money is earmarked for defence. The European Union in general could consider relaxing the fiscal rules under which it has operated for more than 1 decade. But this is also a dilemma for nation-states outside the European Union. London is proving to be the focus of many early-stage, informal talks on whether this can be done through defence bonds, defence development banks, joint borrowing, or other schemes. The United Kingdom government and European Union partners appear to have reached an understanding on the limits of the much vaunted reset in the post-Brexit relationship. The United Kingdom should put defence cooperation at the heart of this reset. This is one of the areas where both sides have a shared interest in developing their own military capabilities and funding their own defence. National defence investment is a contentious issue, with countries fighting to protect their own industries. But there are efficiencies in working together, and after Munich, the rationale for cooperation is compelling. An ambitious reset on defence and security should not focus solely on regular consultations and the occasional PESCO. There needs to be a joint reorientation towards addressing common geopolitical risks together. Starmer seems to get along well with Trump, at least judging by Trump's statements. This relationship is vulnerable to the speed, demands, and unpredictability of the Trump team. Much will depend on Starmer's meeting with Trump in Washington next week. And what does the United States think about the deployment of British troops to Ukraine? The new United States administration, led by Donald Trump, is in fact committed to ending the war in Ukraine. Trump has said that if European countries want to send peacekeepers to Ukraine to provide security guarantees in the event of a peace deal, he would not oppose it. The president said that I have no problem with having troops there. I have no objection to that. It is highly unlikely that the United States would support a coalition of peacekeepers. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine would be completely unacceptable. In this context, we see that the United States and Russia have similar ideas. But how does the United States-Russia rapprochement resonate in the European Union? The fact that Russia and the United States are currently negotiating without Brussels and Kiev being involved in any way is creating mistrust and anxiety on both sides of the Atlantic. Geo-high officials such as United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov were to represent their countries at the meeting, which followed a phone call between Trump and Putin and took place in the sharpest geopolitical tension. Although the situation is very complex, delegations from both countries met to see possible ideas for resolving the conflict. The absence of Ukraine and the European Union from these talks was unsettling, especially given the critical role both sides have played in resisting the Russian invasion. Ukraine, fighting for its independence and sovereignty, has expressed its rejection of any agreement without its direct participation. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has made it clear that Ukraine will not accept any agreement on its future without negotiations. Meanwhile, the meeting in Saudi Arabia was an important step towards a final meeting between Trump and Putin, which the United States President expects to take place very soon. But Rubio, who heads the United States delegation, warned that the road to peace will not be easy or quick. Still, President Trump's message remains inclined to want an end to the conflict and to be open to all future opportunities in negotiations. For its part, Russia has made it clear that it does not see the European Union as a party to the negotiations. Lavrov firmly rejected the idea of the European Union's involvement in the discussions in Ukraine, arguing that the only interest of the European Union's participation should be its own interest, and not the interest of its government, which is seeking justice in the conflict. According to Lavrov, the European Union acted as if it was more interested in prolonging the war than in finding a lasting peace. This did not stop Rubio from insisting that when it comes to real negotiations, both Ukraine and European countries should be part of them. All recognise the geographical and resource implications that participation in negotiations has overlapping with the conflict in Ukraine. Russia insists that Ukraine must cede part of its territory as part of any arrangement. This is a position that is strongly opposed in Ukraine and not very loudly welcomed in the West. The idea of territorial sharing has been present in the negotiation process for a long time and is now emerging as a central part of efforts to achieve peace. The meeting between the United States and Russia in Saudi Arabia has of course opened the door to a wide-ranging dialogue. Both countries recognise that the conflict in Ukraine cannot be resolved without a global approach that includes all interested parties. Of course, this will include key actors such as Ukraine and the European Union. While diplomatic talks continued, the United States continued to push Ukraine on the next front, namely on the country's natural resources. During his recent visit to Kiev, United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent handed Zelenskyy a draft agreement under which Ukrainian and United States companies would assume responsibility for exploiting minerals on Ukrainian territory that are critical to the technology industry and worth $500 billion. This deal was rejected by Zelenskyy on the grounds of lack of guarantees for Ukraine's security, which intensified the American pressure on Ukraine to capitulate on economic issues in exchange for military and financial support. The clear intentions of the United States were expressed by Trump. As a natural compensation for the military and economic assistance Washington has provided since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the United States reserves the right to exploit Ukraine's mineral resources. Allegedly, the deal proposed by Trump aims to authorize the United States to exploit half of Ukraine's mineral wealth, which has so far been understood as a way to ensure that the country gets a return on the billions of dollars invested in the war. Ukraine has vast amounts of strategic minerals such as rare earths, lithium, titanium, and uranium, which are essential for the global technology and energy industries. Unsurprisingly, much of their value in modern conditions of growing demand has not been realised due to the fact that most of the deposits are located in the territory currently occupied by Russia, which complicates the situation. Zelenskyy remains sceptical of Trump's proposal, claiming that any deal on Ukraine's natural resources must also guarantee his country's security. Under pressure, Zelenskyy continues to insist that he will not sign any deal that does not guarantee Ukraine's security and sovereignty. The struggle is being waged both on the battlefield and in the economic sphere, where Ukraine's natural resources have become a major contention. Ukraine's resistance to the terms imposed by Trump shows the complexity of the situation. While the United States continues to demand the exploitation of mineral resources for its economic influence in the region, Ukraine faces the difficult task of balancing international demands with its own security needs. Moreover, the exploitation of Ukraine's mineral resources is fraught with dangers and politically sensitive because they are located in a conflict zone. In short, the situation in Ukraine is still fraught with uncertainties, and the negotiations between the United States and Russia, in which Ukraine and the European Union are not invited to the table, raise a number of questions about the future of the country and the region. We hope that these knots will be untied in the coming days. Thank you for watching us.